Well, good afternoon, everyone in Greenville, Pitt County, and our friends of Common Cause in Eastern North Carolina, or as we like to say, down east. Thank you so much for joining us on this call. And we are going to, over the next hour, have a conversation with Representative Brian Farkas, a freshman. Many of you all know, representing House District 8, I believe. No, House District 9. I think he'll correct me if I'm wrong about that. But we'll be talking with him in the next hour. We'll be certainly talking about a couple of our favorite issues with him, and that's defending voting rights and fair maps. And we'll also connect with a couple of other folks from the area, and again, take your questions during the hour as well. As folks are coming on, I'm going to bring up one of my colleagues, Brian Warner. There he is. Hey, Brian, how are you?
Hey, Bob, how are you?
Doing well, but I know you want me to just jump right into what you're going to do, but you do communications for us. Tell folks a little bit about what that means, if you would.
Absolutely. So, in a nutshell, it's me highlighting the great work of you, Bob, and Jane, and everybody else on staff and our members around the state.
Well, you make us look good, Brian. That's kind of what you
It's
do.
very easy to do working with a
Uh,
pro like you.
well, what we do at Common Cause, and this is a good thing for folks on the Zoom call here to know, is we provide a lot of information. So maybe you can let folks know kind of how they can get better informed about our work and the issues we're working on.
Absolutely. Be happy to. Yeah, a great way to stay in touch with us beyond today's briefing is on our website. If folks go to commoncausenc.org, there they can learn how they can get involved in this work, and also want to bring to attention this link at the very top at the navigation bar, the HBCU Student Action Alliance. Really one of the greatest things we do working with college students around the state at our HBCUs. It's really inspiring. It'll make you feel hopeful for the future. And beyond our website, of course, we're constantly connected on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever you would prefer to do, we are there.
That's great, Brian. Again, can't thank you enough for everything you do to make us look good and promote the great work that our staff, our colleagues do. And I guess through the magic of technology, I'm going to start my PowerPoint. I know you have something to do with that. So thanks again, Brian. And again, what we want to do is in the next hour, and it's 5:03, and we will land the plane at 6 o'clock. I will be very respectful of your time. But we want to talk about two main issues we care about: defending voting rights and redistricting reform. We know what we want. We want laws that will make voting easy and accessible. And we want comprehensive, meaningful redistricting reform that will be a producing of something better than how we do it now in terms of redrawing the maps, and that is having fair maps. And of course, this is the year that this happens. This is 2021 when legislature will sit down and draw the maps, and we want a better process than we have. The reality might be a little different from what we want, but at the same time, that is our goal. That is what we work for. And in the next hour, we'll talk about how we get there. Maybe it's not this year, but we'll certainly be making, we hope, progress. And again, we look forward to kind of letting you know some of our plans. As we get into, though, the conversation with Representative Farkas, let me provide a little bit of context. So what we do know is when the North Carolina legislature came to Raleigh in January, and there they are being sworn in, this was the beginning of what we call the long session. And it's really where lawmakers, they take up a lot of different issues, but primarily they're writing the state budget. But certainly voting rights and redistricting are issues that they will be having to take up, as we mentioned. And there are a few senators huddled around a computer monitor. But let's focus on voting first. Last November, as we know, a record election year for North Carolina with a 75% turnout. And by and large, there were no major problems. Seems like really we should just celebrate and look to make voting laws even better to promote participation. But if we are going to do that, we, Common Cause, and many of our other allies feel that we need to defend what we have. And we know that we had a lot of great laws on the books that made voting by mail, voting from home, easier last year. Nearly 1 million people did it. They cast their ballot by mail. Maybe you were one of those who did that. But practically all the laws that made voting from home easier, such as requesting an absentee ballot online and needing just one witness signature instead of two, and giving counties up to 5 weeks to count the absentee ballots. Most of those laws actually expired last December 31st. That was House Bill 1169, which was a bipartisan bill. And again, unfortunately, most of them have expired. We want to see these laws become permanent, and that's one of the things we'll be working for. Of course, then there are the long-standing laws that we have that we think make for a very good voting system here, and that's a 17-day early voting period, same-day voter registration, and casting, being able to cast a provisional ballot in anywhere in the county where you're registered on election day, and knowing that that provisional ballot will count. We've got to make sure those laws are not tampered with, as we're seeing happening in other states. So again, being very vigilant in defending the laws we have is going to be a part of what Common Cause does. Proactively, we'll be pushing for such things as automatic voter registration. We think that every 18-year-old citizen of North Carolina should be automatically registered to vote. 20 states actually have that, including Virginia and Georgia. Seems like an appropriate time to have that debate. Or another idea is having Election Day as a holiday. We don't think necessarily that this idea will gain traction in this particular session, but we think it's certainly worth having a public discussion about. The reality is we believe, and I think you would agree with us, that we do have some great voting laws in North Carolina. There's room for improvement, but there's certainly some concern in this particular session after this election that we could see an attempt to have some of these good election laws rolled back in the name of election security. And with my nonpartisan hat on, I'll agree with the former U.S. Attorney General that there was no, as they say, the big lie that we had voter fraud. We know there was no large-scale voter fraud here or anywhere else. So defending voting rights is one of the priorities that we have this legislative session. Now on to the other topic that we love to talk about so much, and that's redistricting. Every 10 years following the census, legislative and congressional districts are adjusted to account for the shifts in the population. We know now that our population has grown so much in the last 10 years that we'll be getting an additional congressional seat, moving from 13 to 14 U.S. House representatives. We also know that our urban areas have grown much faster than our rural counties, and that we'll also see more legislative seats being created in our cities and fewer coming out of the rural counties. As you may remember, our lawsuit, Common Cause v. Lewis, that was the state litigation we had. It outlawed the use of partisan data in creating legislative districts. That was a huge win. And there you see some of our friends helping us celebrate on the steps in front of the North Carolina General Assembly. Despite our landmark victory in court, the one thing our case did not address, however, is who draws the maps. And that's a big thing. Who draws the maps? We believe lawmakers should not be drawing their own districts, and yet our court case did not address that. Comprehensive redistricting reform is certainly needed. We do have a model bill that will be filed this session, and I do think I can say safely that Representative Brian Farkas will be a sponsor of that bill. We think, again, taking the map making out of the hands of lawmakers and having it into something that is independent, an independent redistricting commission. This is the actual California Citizens Commission that you're looking at. They have been doing this successfully since 2010, and they will be again letting citizens draw the maps in California this go round. Even though we have this model reform bill that'll be filed, we know it will go nowhere. There we have the two leaders of the legislature, Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger on the left and Speaker Tim Moore on the right. They both, incidentally, in their days of being in the minority back in 2009, sponsored redistricting reform, much of it based on what California does. But today, while they're in power, not so much. And to be fair, Democrats were much the same way. When they ruled the roost pre-2010, they did nothing to further redistricting reform. And it's always been that frustration and that challenge. People support it when they're not in power. They're against it when they are. Our goal is to try to get everybody on the same page at the same time. While we know that this bill will not go anywhere, we do have some things that we are going to be pushing for this particular year that we think we have a chance of being successful at. And that's first and foremost, let's get some more sunshine, more transparency on the process. And there you see the Senate, a group of senators and House members working together in a committee room. That was in 2019 when the courts ordered new legislative and new congressional maps to be drawn. It was done in a more open process than we'd ever seen it. We want to see that again this coming year, and I think we will we will see that. But what we got to have is more context, more information so the public can understand it. We also want to see a lot more public input on both the front end and back end. That's a big crowded public meeting where the public is weighing in on legislative maps. So we may not see it like that, but at least virtually, we certainly want to see that. And the other thing is when the maps are being drawn, we've got to figure out a way where they actually abide by the law. There's an area that looks probably familiar to everybody on this call. That was the House District 8 and 9 map prior to our lawsuit. We challenged, that was one of many of the districts that we actually challenged successfully in the Common Cause v. Lewis. And really, this is what we are insisting that we have when the lawmakers, if they are going to draw the maps in an open process, that they have to explain why they are moving the lines around, whether it splits a city, like we see there, Greenville being split between two House districts, or where it splits a street. Look at 14th Street, and you know more of the roads than I do, but you can see those lines are splitting streets, splitting neighborhoods. We want to have the lawmakers explain that in real time when the map making is going on. So we may not get full redistricting reform like we'd love to have, but at a minimum, we hope to get greater transparency, greater public input, and an explanation of what the heck they're doing when they're doing the deed of drawing the maps. A lot of information and a good time for me to bring on freshman House District 9, Pitt County, Greenville, Representative Brian Farkas. And there he is in his legislative office. He dressed so much better than I am. Representative Farkas, welcome. Thank you so much. You're still on the job, I gather, at this hour.
That's right. It still am. Thanks so much for having me, Bob. It's great to join you all. Even though I'm in Raleigh, I got my pirate purple on, and yeah, proud to represent Pitt County in the State House. It's been a real honor, and working hard to hit the ground running.
Well, I know I would be wrong in saying that I'm seeing that tie as Carolina blue, but you're right. Good.
No way.
Good ECU pirate power, indeed. Let me ask you one thing before we talk about the issues. I had seen where you had said once that you lived in an area that had representation from two fine public servants, former Representative Marion McLaughlin in the State House, and then former U.S. House member Walter Jones, one a Democrat, one a Republican. In the spirit of that comment that you made, what are you seeing as a freshman, your ability to reach across the aisle, meet Republicans, maybe freshman Republicans, talking with them and all that? Is that happening, or are things unfortunately so polarized in Raleigh like we see in Washington that both parties or both sides are just locked in?
Right. Well, I would say that I'm still optimistic and I'm hopeful. I think that this session has kicked off in a relatively good way in terms of showing good faith efforts to work across the aisle. I know when we elected some new leadership on the Democratic side, that was something we were very intentional about reaching out with to Speaker Moore and the Republican leadership and saying, you know, we just want a fair and good faith effort to work together. I do think and suspect that now that we've gotten past the governor's race and the legislative races are over, probably, you know, in terms of competitiveness, you know, at least for 2 years, the governor's race for 4. I think we've seen a little bit more of that good faith gesture because of that, and maybe that pressure isn't bearing down as much. But otherwise, no, I think we're in a pretty good place. I've been probably over the top intentional about spending time and getting to know my Republican colleagues. Growing up in Pitt County, it's a place with a real independent spirit, and like I mentioned earlier with Marion McLaughlin or Congressman Jones, those were folks that had a reputation for kind of leaving party at the door at times and getting stuff done. As a matter of fact, I've got a state representative on the Republican side thus far. Every day when the chamber ends, regardless of what happens, he and I cross the aisle and we go say hello to each other. We make sure that we bump fists and and keep it civil and keep it friendly. So trying everything I can.
I think that's great. I mean, it all is about relationships, and certainly things aren't always going to be where you agree on issues, but we want to have civil discourse. And I think that's good that you're starting out that way. I gather you're one of those people. I've known you for a while, and I think the old-fashioned shoe leather retail politicking is just right up your alley. Tell me what you saw working in this past very odd, very challenging year of COVID in terms of how people were voting and those laws we had that made voting from home, voting by mail easier. What was your experience in talking to people who are now your constituents about how that worked?
Yeah, and like you said, I'm real old school. I ran for this office twice. In 2016, more of a, I guess you would call, conventional time. I was knocking doors and literally pounding the pavement. We had to adapt that ground strategy quite a bit with the pandemic, and it kind of shifted a lot of phone calls to voters. But I also had the opportunity, we had early voting sites, to stand out there for a number of days and just kind of listen and see how these processes were working. Like you mentioned, how 1169 was actually put into practice, and frankly, I thought I thought everything went really well. We had some lines at times, and I would attribute a lot of that to the social distancing requirements that were instituted as well. But overall, I would say it worked really well, and we were very fortunate to have the mail-in voting as an option. And the flexibility that came with that. Not only could you get the ballot and then mail it in, but if you wanted, you could get that ballot, request it, and then actually hand deliver it too. Having that kind of flexibility and frankly, flexibility in general, I think voters really responded to in a really positive way. I love that legislation helped get some barriers down. I think it was very helpful.
Well, we hope that, of course, some of these could be made permanent. The online portal, the ability to actually make a request of a ballot electronically, I understand, still does prevail. But just even reducing the witness signature requirement from 2 to 1 does not. Is there any good reason to go back to 2 witness signatures? And do you think there is any prospects of having some of these great laws that were put in place that made voting by mail easier might be made permanent, or what are you hearing, or what are you thinking might happen?
I don't think there's a good reason at all. I haven't seen it and I haven't heard it about some of the things you talked about, like the second signature. I think there may have been a little frustration at times that sometimes people had to go get one. When I was just at the poll and someone realized maybe they hadn't done everything they needed to do. That being said, any voter who had an issue, they went above and beyond to try to fix it. And I think voters made, like I talked earlier, a good faith effort to do things the right way. So I don't believe we need to backtrack at all on this, whether it's the early voting window that we've got, the 17-day window. I think that was very helpful. I do not think we need the additional signature. I think we've got to keep moving forward. And as a matter of, the fact that we were able to accomplish so much, such a forward-thinking concept in a pandemic, I think that just says the sky's the limits when we're not dealing with something like that. And we should definitely continue with what we've got. We in terms of your other question about what we're hearing, thus far we have not heard very much from leadership that there may be some plans in place to kind of go the other direction. I am keeping a close watch on that. As a matter of fact, a number of representatives are doing that here because it's something we do not want to see happen, and we're going to get loud and bothersome if it does. But that doesn't mean we rest on our laurels either. I think that we do what we can, the ones that are in and are into these good government principles and protecting the vote. We look for opportunities to cement this progress we've made, even if it's just small victories. But yeah, rest assured, if we start getting wind of something that's not good, you all are going to be one of the first to hear it, and we're going to need your help.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, we're nonpartisan, but I would make the contention with anybody that this is not partisan stuff we're talking about. And certainly in the last election, both parties benefited from these laws. Both parties, you might even say, overperformed. And it just seems to us it's in the best public interest to make voting as easy and as accessible for everybody. Certainly, we all want to be making sure that elections are secure. But we know it's a big lie that there was a voter fraud. I mean, I say that and with some irritation because there was no voter fraud. But anyhow, let me shift. Well, go ahead. I don't know if you wanted to say anything or not.
Oh, I was just going to say, like I said, I stood outside of polls for 17 days. I had members of my family doing it at other locations. We had a team coverage everywhere. That wasn't happening. The voter fraud accusations we saw coming out of the national conversation were just they were baseless. And I'd want to quickly just say Pitt County Board of Elections, where I am, just did an incredible amount of work with limited resources and hardworking staff to make sure that wasn't an issue in Pitt County. And we had a number of vote protectors on the ground, nonpartisan, that were there just inside and outside the polling places, just to be there and make sure that nothing was wrong. I mean, Pitt County, I think, was a glowing example of where we did it right. And to your point, Bob, I mean, I think our numbers were way up on both sides. And, having grown up in a family of all unaffiliated voters, and I'm a Democrat, I mean, I view these issues as completely nonpartisan too. So, these are the things we don't need to let the politics and political affiliations get in. It's just the right thing to do.
Well, another issue I believe really is nonpartisan is redistricting reform. I mean, let's have fair maps and let's get it where neither party has to worry about being gerrymandered into oblivion. I understand you're going to put your name to one of those reform bills, and we certainly appreciate that. I know you and I have had conversations in the past. Why do you believe we have to change the process that we have in North Carolina in drawing the maps?
Well, I think you said it best earlier when we look at the history of North Carolina, and both parties, Democrats and Republicans, are when they're in power, we're guilty of doing this, of gerrymandering and splitting communities, dividing our Pitt County. Oftentimes was a real on the front lines of this, as you saw with the last lawsuit. But again, that went back decades and decades. And I view redistricting, I view the practice of gerrymandering as such a foundational flaw in our democracy, that if we could truly generate good competition in districts across the state, in mine and everywhere, good competition in an exchange of ideas in a civil way is good. And I should have to run against a Republican in a competitive seat every time and be held accountable for my votes, and at the same time fight for my ideas and why I think I made the right decisions. The more competition we have statewide, I think the more opportunities for consensus exist for us to actually compromise, as opposed to districts that are drawn so far left or so far right that no one feels the need to actually find that compromise and that middle ground where we can actually advance things that make our people and our communities better. So it's been an issue for me for a long time. I've researched it. I mean, I've been on the receiving end of gerrymandering when it comes to a community being completely split. I've campaigned in neighborhoods that literally one side of the street was in one district and the other side wasn't. It was kind of surreal. We have got to empower our communities and make sure that they've got power with one voice in a district, as opposed to being split amongst a lot of different partisan playmakers who just are trying to protect themselves and protect their jobs. It's something I'm excited to hop on board with a number of different collaborators and try to move real comprehensive legislation forward to fix it.
Well, Representative, I apologize. It looks like we may have lost Bob for a moment, but I might bring in my colleague Jane Pinsky as Bob strives to reconnect. Jane, if you want to maybe jump in. Jane is a longtime lobbyists at the General Assembly. And Jane, maybe you want to take it here while we try to get Bob to reconnect.
Sure. One of the things I'd love to talk to you about, Representative, is ways that you think we could structure legislation that avoids the people yelling voter fraud, but continues to encourage people to vote. I mean, we had, what, 75% of the registered voters turn out this year. 65% of them voted in the at one-day voting and one-stop voting. Are there other things you can think of that would encourage us to have higher numbers of people turning out?
Well, it's a great question. And I think Bob kind of hit on a little bit earlier when we talked about the efforts that Common Cause and other organizations are making to just try to emphasize more sunshine and transparency into all of our processes. I think that's a huge thing, because it's no secret that, if you did a poll of people and you asked them, what's their level of faith in government, that unfortunately the percentage isn't where we want to be. There was a time when people believed that, a good majority in the 70s and 80% believed that government was a true place that solved problems. And unfortunately, starting in the 70s, a narrative kind of emerged that government wasn't that. And I'm not saying that, government needs to be in every place, but it can serve as a real reliable vehicle for making sure that people come together, they talk about the issues that affect them, and that we put forward policy where no one gets left behind. And so I think by making sure that we are putting transparency and as much sunlight into the processes as we possibly can, especially one like this, where it is can easily be distorted if we don't do it the right way, is just business as usual and politicians watching out for themselves. If we really inject that sunshine and let people see that, these folks are trying to do this the right way, and build that faith in our institutions, rebuild that faith, I think that would go a long way towards getting people more involved. I mean, I had a number of conversations with people as I called during the last campaign where they just felt like it was broken. I remember one guy, he wasn't going to vote at all. And I stayed on the phone with him for 25, 30 minutes trying to convince him to vote. And we got him to do it. But, it's frustrating to hear those calls. And we should definitely try to do whatever we can to get it, make it better and make it something that people get excited about. And I think, Bob called it a little bit of a long shot right now, but I think the idea of an election day as a holiday at a state or national level is a really good idea, because it's going to send a signal to the generations after us where our priorities are, and that election day is one of them. Again, remove the excuses to being a part of our process.
Well, speaking of the generations after us, you're part of a new generation at the General Assembly. I suspect when you walk into the room, you drop the average age by 20, 30 years or more.
Yeah.
What are we going to do to make sure that people like you get elected? I'll be honest, I'm of the generation that can get vaccine right now. And I think it's time we turn things over to you. But I also get the sense that your generation doesn't trust political parties, and they don't trust politicians, or even what we used to call public servants.
Yeah, that's valid points and observations. I mean, I'm 33, excited to kind of be in here. And frankly, a lot of folks my age don't have this opportunity. I'm incredibly blessed that, I work in a small business where I've got the flexibility to do this job and do it well, at the same time do that job and do it well. And a lot of, unfortunately, the way that the legislature is structured, a lot of folks my age don't have that. We got, people my age on average are usually trying to, make sure that they're in a job that can, provide for a family, or they've got a ton of student debt now that a lot of my generations before me didn't have to deal with, that they've got to really devote focus and energy and a lot of their good earning years towards that. Again, I'm really fortunate to be where I am and to have this chance. But when I'm here, I feel like I've got to make sure I'm a voice for all of them, because there's so many people my age who can't do it. So, I mean, we've got to maybe have some long-term conversations about professionalization of the legislature. And what that would need to look like to entice more people to want to run and be a part of this. and diversify, not only by age, but any demographic that you could break down. I think that would go a long way. But that's probably going to be a project down the road to try to get people back. And yeah, you're right. The younger generations, my observation too, is that there's definitely more of an independent spirit, more of a hesitation to get back into political parties, if you will. And I get it. And at the same time, I think the onus is on the parties to really take a hard look in the mirror, both of them, and see what is it that's driving people away. And I think it's the hyper-partisanship. It's the lack of compromise, no one working together. Both parties are guilty of this, especially as the higher you go, in the national level. So yeah, I think it's going to be up to young leaders to, honor history. We have a respect for history and know when things worked well, and carry some of those skills here, but then maybe offer a little bit of a different way to do things and try to find that middle way.
So that
Representative Farkas, let me jump in, and Jane, thank you for.
Yeah, there he is.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought, you said your office, you call it Brian's bunker. I would have thought maybe the power surge or connectivity would have been on your end, but I think I had a power surge on mine. I know you've got a caucus meeting to get to, and I do want to first thank you, but I don't know whether in a minute or two, though, you can also briefly tick off some of the other priorities that I know you are interested in, like rural broadband. I will take a guess that that's one of your things, but if you want to just spend a minute or two on that, I know we're kind of running late. Thank you for, again, indulging us, but why don't you tell us a little bit about what some of the other things you're going to be working on.
Sure. Well, like I said, these principles of fixing our democracy itself are going to be a high priority for me, and stay tuned on the legislation as we roll that out, because whether it's redistricting, voting rights, campaign finance reform, that's foundational. And if we do not fix that, it's very tough for us to get bold on the other things. Some of my other priorities, though, we've already got legislation filed to hopefully get a new facility for ECU's Brody School of Medicine. That's a game-changing investment that would allow us to increase the class size to 120 people, help with healthcare access across Eastern North Carolina. The Brody School of Medicine graduates more physicians that actually stay in North Carolina than any other institution, and we've got to really lean in on that. Rural broadband, like you mentioned, that's a high priority for me. I'm working with DOT and a number of other actors right now, trying to find who my partners are here in the halls of the legislature, to see even if there are some basic fixes to make sure we're improving access to our rural areas, and frankly, in our underserved areas that may not be rural. We've got those issues out in Greenville as well. There's only one real game in town, and we've got to have a real conversation about that. Making sure that public education is a priority for me. Restoring master's pay, that is a high priority. I'm working on that, especially because East Carolina graduates such a capable crop of teachers every year out of their education. Their School of Education, and maybe even restoring the Teaching Fellows program with an added emphasis on diversity. Those are some things I'm looking at. There's a whole lot more. I'm running all over the halls here to get whatever I can done, because I've been given 2 years by Pitt County's people to get to work, and I want to make them proud.
Good for you. A lot of great, what I consider to be bipartisan issues you listed there too. So I wish you the best. Again, thank you so much for what you're doing, your service to Greenville. Great that you're a longtime friend of Common Cause prior to your election. We look forward to working with you. And are you driving back and forth? Last question. You go back and forth every night, or do you stay in Raleigh?
I do a good amount of that. Sometimes I stay here based on the committee schedule in the morning. They've been starting me kind of early, so I figure I'd go ahead and get here. And my brother lives locally. I can hang with him, and we've got options. So
yeah, I mean, I was looking one of the local interviews, one of the TV stations down there, and I know you're putting in the long hours, and but it sounds like you've hit the ground running. So again, thanks so much, and I'm sure we'll be checking in with you soon.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you all for all you're doing. Keep fighting the good fight, and I'm looking forward to working together.
That's great. Thanks again. Well, once again, we thank Representative Brian Farkas for joining us on this call. And before we get to questions that some of you may have, I want to bring up my other colleague. You saw Jane Pinsky. We're going to talk to her on questions that we get. But Zinnia Bynum, who is our development coordinator and can talk a little bit about how we survive, how we sustain our growth, and certainly through the great help from people like you and many others around the state. So Zinnia, do you want to come up and chat? I see your face. There you are. Hey there.
Hey, everybody. As Bob said, I am Zinnia Bynum here at Common Cause. My role is development coordinator, which does imply that I'm going to be asking you all to make a donation here today. But before I do so, I did want to tell you what investing into our work allows you to do. And so when you give to Common Cause, you are helping us protect our gerrymandering wins in our court. You're going to help us fight for fair maps in this most crucial year where we are redrawing districts. You're going to be putting your money where it matters the most. It also goes to help amplify your voice in the legislature. We have wonderful lobbyists like Jane who are working tirelessly to put democracy on the agenda of every politician. Finally, that is going to go to help our one-of-a-kind HBCU Student Action Alliance, which we feel is creating the next generation of activists, leader, and are going to be the people who eventually take all of our jobs. And your support can take many forms. You can help volunteer, you can help notify your networks and, letting people know about events like these. Or yes, you may give directly. We are asking everybody here on the call to consider making a $50 donation. This is going to help us make events like this happen in the future, as well as helping our wonderful staff and supporting them and supporting our mission. And so if that is something you'd be interested in doing, I'm going to be putting the link into the chat immediately after I stop speaking. And I really do appreciate your consideration, your support, and for you being among us in this fight for freer and fairer North Carolina. And I think that is all that I have to say. So Bob, I will point it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Zinnia. Again, appreciate all your great work for Common Cause North Carolina. And folks, obviously, I always hate to even say, hey, please help us out. Everybody gets hit up for money. It is, and Zinnia might have mentioned this too, a tax deductible if you give to what is our 501c3, but it does help us keep going. But there are many other ways to volunteer too, and we'll be talking to some great folks from your area about that as well. But first, let's get to some of the questions that maybe you all have put to us, particularly following the great conversation we had with Representative Farkas. And we'll bring back up wow, Jane, the most valuable player. I guess, I don't know what happened. I figure you pulled the plug on my end. I'm going to hold you responsible, but thank you for quickly pitching in as I guess I disappeared. But Brent Lawrence, also another colleague. Brent, I know you've been fielding maybe the tough questions we're getting here. So what do you have?
Yeah, first question we have is, what can we do at the grassroots level to influence our legislators to keep last year's voting laws?
Well, Jane, it sounded like maybe when I was away, you all were talking a little bit about voting. And I know you were at a committee meeting today where there was some questions asked of our State Board of Elections director. And although that's not necessarily about those laws, but you've been a lobbyist a long time. What do you think? What can people do in Greenville, Pitt County, or anywhere in North Carolina to maybe help us get these, what I think were very good laws, perhaps made permanent?
Well, I think people need to speak up, and I can't tell where in Pitt County everybody lives, but some of the people on this call are probably represented by Representative Humphreys, others by Representative Smith, Senator Don Davis, obviously Representative Farkas. You need to tell them that you want to go back to what we had as of December 30th, 2020. And you need to, if you've got a good story about an aunt or a cousin or a neighbor or a coworker who voted this time because they only needed one signature for a witness, or because they could take advantage of early voting, please share that with them and share it with us, and we'll make sure that they get the word and that other people get the word. Part of what we heard at that hearing today was that something like 65% of the almost 6 million people who voted during one-stop voting. And so we need to make sure that's there and it goes long enough.
Very good, Jane. And the only thing I would say is, if you have an aunt, is how I like to say it in, the North Carolina pronunciation. But Brent, before Jane talks, go to the next question, please.
Yeah, next question about redistricting and what can folks do on the ground to help influence the process this year and ensure it's fairer and more open, kind of as you alluded to.
You know, Jane, it's a lot of the same question, but we did see 2 years ago where we had a better process than we typically have. And we've heard from the leadership and published reports that they do plan on maybe maintaining that transparency. But it was so confusing, it was even hard for us to follow it. What should the average citizen do for something that many of them, they don't really know what this is all about, but yet it's so important that we have, I think, more sunshine. I know you believe that too, as opposed to the back room where both parties have their maps, but the majority party prevails, and voila, there it is. How do we break that this session where we know we're not going to get comprehensive reform, but maybe we can get more sunshine?
Well, I think the first thing we can do again is speak up. And everybody's probably heard that census data has been delayed, and the numbers we should have had about a week ago, we won't get until sometime in September. So there's a long time before we actually redraw the districts. And I think people should take advantage of the next, 7 months, 6 months, and talk to your legislators. Tell them you want real transparency. I kind of liken the way the process was last time to the way it was when I tried to talk to someone in the grocery store who was behind a plexiglass barrier with a mask on today. I knew she was talking and I knew she was saying words, but I couldn't understand them. Watching the process the last time was exactly the same. So we want people to say, we want you to draw one district at a time in the House and one district at a time in the Senate, and let us give you feedback in real time. People can give us feedback in real time here. They can say, oh, Jane, stop talking, or let Bob talk, or oh, I have a question for, and we should be able to do that. And the other thing people need to do is start thinking about how they define their community. We are going to encourage the legislature, but also all legislators, to hold public hearings. So if you don't like the fact that Greenville is split 3 different ways and Pitt County is split 3 different ways between the legislature and Congress, figure out how you would draw those lines and be ready to tell them.
And sort of what our colleague said at the top, Brian Warner, stay informed and keep up with us. We'll be putting out a lot of information about how to do just what you said, Jane, and sort of what's happening with regard to the process. Brent, do we have any others? These are all good questions.
Got at least one more right now. If other folks want to drop something in the Q&A box in the next couple of minutes, they can. But this question is, what are the prospects for voting rights or voting reform at the federal level?
It's another one of my favorite questions. And Jane, you have heard me answer, but maybe since maybe we want them to think that I can answer a question as well, maybe I'll try to start out on that. HR 1, the For the People Act, does a lot of great things, including calling for reforming redistricting across the country, good voting rights, campaign finance reform laws, a lot of great things improving democracy. It will be, from what we understand from our national Common Cause lobbyists, will be something that will be passed by the House, U.S. House. But the problem is it runs into this roadblock that the Senate has, their arcane rules that require passage of anything that's not material to the budget by 60 votes. And this reconciliation process where you can get something connected to the budget and do it with a simple majority is not possible, unfortunately, with HR 1. There is legislation that is separate that would be reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act. It's legislation named after John Lewis. There is some hope and thought that maybe that would pass, particularly since the last time it was authorized was under the watch of George W. Bush, and I believe it was one of the chambers was controlled by Republicans, maybe the Senate. So there is some hope that maybe that particular piece might actually get by both the House and the Senate. We're certainly lobbying hard for this. We are urging, and to what Jane has said, and I'll say it too, always know your voice is powerful with the people who represent you. And in this case, it would be connecting with Senators Burr and Tillis and urging them to support the HR 1 For the People act, which will at some point go to the Senate for their consideration. It would be terrific if they would support it. So again, I would urge people to do that. It is 5:45, and I think these are fantastic questions. But Jane, I will actually have you stay on the call here, and maybe we can bring up some friends of ours who they were very helpful to us when we had, gosh, it seems like 10 years ago, but this litigation that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Greenville's Cheryl and Richard Taft, and through the I guess the magic of our Zoom call, I'm seeing them coming up here. We wanted to, again, let people on this call know. There they are.
Yeah,
Hey,
here we
Cheryl,
are.
how are you all?
We're good.
Doing well.
Very good. Thank you for joining us. And we wanted to bring you all up as just another example of how so many good folks help us out in so many ways. You all were a part of the Common Cause v. Rucho landmark litigation that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Richard, I know you told me that you both got a chance to actually see it, which is terrific when that case was actually argued. But tell me, why get involved with that? Why become a plaintiff? And, what is your interest in terms of that issue? Certainly, we appreciate it.
Well, I'll let Cheryl go first because she's good at explaining this.
Well, initially, we have really never been very politically active, but and as Brian Farkas said, we were friends and appreciated all that Walter Jones did. And then when he changed parties to the Republican Party, it really didn't matter to us. So those are the kinds of issues that we just never felt. As he also, or you mentioned, Pitt County has pretty much been an independent voting area. But we really got involved when my cousin, Eddie Spees, called and asked if we would be part of that litigation. And the more we read, and I was a math major undergrad, so I love numbers. And I must say that even the Supreme Court hearing, when I went to Greensboro for the appeals court there, I was blown away with the mathematical models that, no reasonable person could have looked at those and not seen the egregious effects of the gerrymandering. And so that to me made the biggest impact. And we've really got, I think, involved even more so when it was at the appeals court level. And then we did get an opportunity to go to Washington, and that was amazing. I will say that to be able to sit there, I'd never been to the Supreme Court before, and we just we felt that we really recognized the sacred space that was there. I do feel that if we had to go back there again, that perhaps we might be able to win. I just feel that it was such an important issue, even though we were following Pennsylvania and there were other areas. But I think the fact that the gerrymandering not only affects our representation in Congress and also in the legislature in Raleigh, but diminishing powers of our governor or whatever may be an impact. I just think we need to work hard on that.
The other thing that is just to continue with what Cheryl was saying, when I began to learn the numbers and see the process, and when I read the lawsuit that Eddie Spees and his team put together, and some of the comments that the Republican leadership said, I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit here, but I think my theme is correct. It was either, I think David Lewis said when the gentleman that drew the map by computer for the Republicans, he said, we drew the map so we knew we would win 10 10 districts, and we packed all the Democrats into 3 districts so that they would win 3 districts and we would win 10. And we would have tried to win 11 if we could, and they only win 2, but we couldn't computer-wise do that. So we had to be happy with 3. And he said, we recognize that this is an egregious process, but it's political, it's not legal. It's okay for us to do that, and we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And so he basically said, I'm going to stick the dagger in your chest, whether you like it or not. And, and that kind of resonated with me and said, you know what? If that's the way our political leaders think, we got a big problem. And from that point on, I said, Cheryl, we need to do everything we can just at our level to try to help change this and get independent citizen commissions like you talked about, Bob. That's what we need. And to not have transparency and to have these districts drawn in a smoke-filled closed door room where no Democrats in there, no citizens in there, and the leaders are in there and they're just going to use their power to get what they can. It's not democracy. And that's why I'm happy that Common Cause is fighting the fight for us, and Cheryl and I are going to support you guys. And so thank you for what you do.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Jane. I know you join me in thanking.
Right. I'm jealous, though, about the Supreme Court.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful that you all got a chance to see that. Obviously, we're big fans of your cousin, who is, bar none, the expert in redistricting and has been such a big part of his career helping to fight the good fight. But thank you both for being informed, being involved, and doing what you do to help us.
Sure.
And really what you're trying to do and help make for a better North Carolina. So I know
Loved it.
I'll say one other thing to Jane. Jane, don't be too jealous of us because the seats in the Supreme Court are extremely uncomfortable. So, so if you go there, I hope you have a good back.
Yes.
That makes me feel a little better. I hear they're narrow too.
They are. They're very narrow. But you meet some really interesting people, though. There's no question about that.
That's interesting to hear. Maybe, who knows, maybe future litigation is all in our future, but we'll have to just wait and see. Thank you again. And
you're quite welcome.
Jane, why don't you just stay with me here? It's 5:53, and let's bring up our friend also with Eastern North Carolina roots, and that is our Common Cause North Carolina Vice Chair, Mary Morgan. And Mary, if you are able to turn your camera on and unmute your microphone here, we will quickly, I see your name, and looks like you're getting your mic unmuted and your camera on.
We're all learning lots of new skills with this technology, I have to say.
Well, interestingly enough, and people on the call know Mary Morgan probably because of her father, Jane, and I know you are new to North Carolina, but Mary's mic is on now. So there we are. All right.
Yes.
How are you?
Thank you. I've had connectivity issues all day long, so
Yeah.
happy
Mary,
to get back
no
on.
problem. And I actually, I lost power here, so I was off the call briefly, so know what you're going through. Why are you involved, Mary, I guess would be with this issue? I was about to say, who your dad was, and I know that might have some part of it, but what is it that motivates you to be a part of what we are all trying to do, and that is make for a better democracy?
Well, I've been involved with Common Cause for a long time now, and it's interesting how Common Cause keeps changing with the issues that are becoming prominent in different years and different time periods. And about 10 years ago, when I became involved, it was because I care deeply about campaign finance reform, and Common Cause was on the cutting edge, leading the way for reform. And I had grown up in politics, and from the time I was a young person, saw politicians and public servants out shaking hands and making speeches and I stood at shopping centers handing out cards. And back during that time, it seemed to me that the candidate that won was a candidate who connected with the people the most, who met the most people and talked to the most people. And then gradually we started having a shift all over the country. It was really the person who raised the most money who won, because that person could get on TV, have constant ads, do constant mailing. And we've even had candidates that don't even go out and make public appearances or meet any voters, because it's just, if you raise the money, it doesn't matter about talking to the voters. And that was what led me to originally get involved. But then I became aware of the redistricting issue and became concerned about that. And Common Cause was working for reform, and I realized how important it was. And then the voting rights issues of current times. Some of these issues I thought were history in America, about suppressing the vote, and I thought we were all about making it easier for people to vote. And so I know, like a lot of people right now in our country, I worry and I'm concerned about the state of our democracy. I can't believe we're living in a time where democracy is at risk, and whoever thought we'd get back here. And I know everybody is worried and wants to know what to do. Like, what can you do about it? Well, I feel like being involved with Common Cause, that's what I can do, because I'm just one person. But if I can support Common Cause, not only are they in North Carolina, but they have a nationwide presence and know how to advocate and get things done and file lawsuits that need to be filed. And so I do feel like there is some hope, and that's because of Common Cause. Otherwise, I don't know how I'd focus my energy to try and make a difference. And so I really appreciate what Common Cause does. And I appreciate the TAFs being involved. I think you are a great spokesman. I'm so happy that you were part of a lawsuit, and wish we could send you out everywhere talking, because I think you could change the world with your story. But thank you.
Mary, thank you. I mean, we certainly appreciate your leadership on the board and everything you've done to help us grow and hopefully even be better at fighting the good fight. And let it be said, for folks on this call, your dad, who was a former U.S. Senator and Attorney General, did so many things to serve North Carolina, but he also was chair of the ECU trustees, I understand, and really, with the TAFs on, and I was talking to Richard earlier, but did so much for promoting East Carolina University and Eastern North Carolina. So no doubt many people on the call know of your dad and of the work that he did for their area.
Well, I know he was so proud of the ECU School of Medicine and what it has done to help Eastern North Carolina. And these days, with the rural-urban divide, what would Eastern North Carolina do without that medical school there? And so I hope that it gets to expand, because it really has done what it set out to do, which was to create physicians that would stay in North Carolina and serve areas that may not otherwise have a doctor. So, I hope Representative Farkas has a lot of luck with his bill to try and get more funding for the
Yeah, we do too. That should be a good bipartisan bill, and we hope he does get that. So, Mary, thank you so much.
Before Mary goes, can we just point out what the important thing she said, which is when you're just one person and you feel like you can't do anything, if you can find 5 other people to do something with, then you really can change the world. And we'll tell everybody who's on this call that we're going to be reaching out to you to help us change North Carolina. And we would really appreciate your help.
Well stated. And Mary, again, thanks so much for all you do for us.
Oh, I'm happy to do it.
Okay. 5:59, and Jane, you can stay right here as we end our 6th and final legislative briefing. And as I like to end these things with a quote from our founder, John Gardner, who said, all excellence involves discipline and tenacity of purpose. Jane, I think of you and tenacity of purpose. What does that mean to you, and how can you relate that quote from our founder to what we do?
Well, I appreciate your saying that, Bob. My children and my husband would probably say I'm just too stubborn to recognize when I should quit. But I just think that if we all keep trying, eventually things will change. And I'm going to answer you with a quote that's one of my favorites, which is from Nelson Mandela, who said, "A thing is impossible until it is done." I think if we'd ever thought that Nelson Mandela would go from Robbins Island to lead South Africa, if he can do that, we can change politics in North Carolina.
Wow. Jane, I mean, I love both the people that we've quoted, and you may have outquoted me here. So very nicely done. Folks, anyway, we can't thank you enough for taking time to be on this call with us this afternoon and all you do to help us do our work. We certainly, you can tell Jane's enthusiasm. She enjoys hearing from you just as I do. It's easy to get up with us, questions, comments, advice, all of that we certainly appreciate. So once again, cannot thank you enough. There's so many ways you can help us, whether it's making a contribution or volunteering for anything and everything we do. All of it is good. And all I can say is, like Jane said, we're going to keep our head up and keep trying to do what we think you want us to do and what we all want, and that is the best democracy possible for North Carolina. So with that, I will say thank you again and good evening.